I hope everyone hears that this is recording.
We can repeat that once everyone's in too.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody as you're coming in. We'll give it a few minutes for everyone to slide in.
I wish we had some welcome music. That'd be nice. Some elevator music. Yeah. And feel free to use the chat function and the Q&A as well. We'll be monitoring it throughout the webinar.
Welcome everyone that's coming in. We'll give it a few minutes as till just about 5:30. We'll give it a few minutes while everyone's rolling in, and just so everyone knows, this is being recorded. Feel free to use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves or the Q&A, and we'll be monitoring it throughout this evening. All right, we've still got people rolling in. We'll give it just one more minute and then we'll get going. This is being recorded. Feel free to use the chat function. It looks like a lot of people are introducing themselves, and the Q&A will be monitoring throughout. Well, it's so fun to see where everybody is coming from. And feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. This is being recorded. It will be available on the CNPS YouTube channel. And I'm going to get started.
Yeah, let's get started. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining our Native Gardening 101 series. We're going to be focusing on planting natives today.
Well, hi, I'm Anne Marie Benz. I'm CMPS's Horticulture Programs Manager, and I'm based out of Cazadero, California, up in Western Sonoma County.
And I'm Maya Argamon, and I am the Horticulture Programs Coordinator with CNPS. I am currently in San Francisco, and it's great to see all of you commenting in the chat. And we have wonderful Haven Kiers, who is, if you want to go to the next slide, she is going to be our main speaker today. And she is an assistant professor of landscape architecture at UC Davis. And I also went to Davis, so it's great to see a fellow Aggie that we're featuring today. And her research investigates the intersection of ecology and aesthetics through studies examining the environmental benefits, technological processes, and cultural acceptance of green infrastructure and sustainable design. She received her bachelor's at Brown and her master's of landscape architecture at UC Berkeley, and has worked as a landscape architect, a city and environmental planner, project manager, and a consultant. And she really specializes in green roof design and has spent more than 15 years teaching students about green infrastructure. So thank you so much, Haven, for joining us. We're so excited to hear from you. And yeah, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. And thank you for that introduction. That was kind of fun. I like hearing all about myself.
Yeah, you've done so much. It's great.
Yeah, you could put it that way, or I've been all over the place and yeah, finally settling down, I hope, as a professor. Okay, I am going to share my screen, and give me 1 second while I get this all going. And
Great.
I do want to hear more about your green roof design, and we have to do
it's so much fun. The green roofs there. I actually have some photos of green roofs in the presentation. So
okay, great. Yeah, I live right by the Academy of Sciences, and they have their green roof there too.
Oh, that's one of my favorite ones. Anyone who gets the chance to go there should definitely go check that one out. It's fantastic. Okay, well, so today I am going to be talking about planting 101. And I know that you all, for people who have come to some of the others, maybe there's going to be some overlap with watering or irrigation 101 next time, and with plant selection from before. But bear with me, because I figure that I'm going to have a different perspective on all of these things. And keep that in mind with all of this, is that this is just one perspective, and people are going to have all sorts of thoughts and ideas, especially with native plants, on the best way to do things. I am coming at this with a fair amount of experience. Before I was working as a professor here at Davis, I worked at the UC Davis Arboretum for a number of years. So that's where I got all my California native plant knowledge. It's pretty amazing. I went from at the Arboretum being kind of the person that everyone laughed at as the landscape architect, being like, you silly woman, you know nothing about plants, to suddenly being like plant expert in landscape architecture. And everyone thinks that I know all of this stuff. So it's been kind of fun to play around with that. Okay, I am trying to figure out how to move forward. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today, I basically have the planting set up into 3 major principles. We're going to start by talking a little bit about design, because I know we're talking about the actual planting, but in order to plant, we have to do design, and I'm a landscape architect. And so I want to talk about some of that. Then we're going to go into the installation. So the nuts and bolts of how do you plant a native plant? What are the things you need to think about? Starting with site prep, the actual planting, a little bit about irrigation, mulch. And then it's really like, I just don't think that there can be any presentation, anything about planting without talking about maintenance. It's something that I talk to my students about all of the time. It's something that I just think is like really the crux of any design, any kind of thing, is thinking about what's going to happen in the long term and how are you going to plan for that. Okay. Sorry, the movement forward. Okay, I figured it out. All right. So let's start talking about design, and really when I think about design, I think about use. How is this native plant garden going to be used? And so use is an expression of function, like what is the function of the garden? And I feel like really we tend to break it up into 4 categories. We talk a lot about sustainability. And so we talk about reducing water and taking lawn out and using drought tolerant plants. And then we can also talk about designing a garden for biodiversity. And if we're talking about biodiversity, then we're talking about bringing in the birds and the insects and trying to create habitat. Or we can talk about designing for health and well-being and engagement and thinking about people in the garden and how are the people using it and how are they engaging with the garden space and the nature around them. And then again, landscape architect, designer, I want to talk about aesthetics. And I want to think finally about what does this garden look like and how do I make it look even better? So I'm here to tell you that you can have it all, that we don't need to just design for one thing. You don't need to focus on just sustainability, or you don't need to focus only on the aesthetics. And we see gardens that really, it's like, okay, this falls into this category of a sustainable garden, and this one is a biodiverse garden. And I think one of the things that I've learned in my time teaching and designing projects, a lot of them here on the Davis campus, is this idea of multifunctional landscapes and how specifically do you use plants and ideally native plants to create spaces that can reduce maintenance, that can be sustainable, that people want to be in, that they want to engage in with each other, they want to watch the insects, see the birds come in, that it has that multifunctionality within it. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about those 2 areas. So, the first one is this idea of sustainability and really thinking about how do we design to create gardens and to select plants that make a garden sustainable. I think we all are in agreement that just that typical front lawn, water soaking up, with a few plants in front of, or, shrubs, ornamental shrubs in front of the house, that's not necessarily the paradigm that we want to promote anymore. That if we're talking about native plants, let's talk about ones that are drought tolerant, that don't, lawns that don't need to be mown. Maybe you're using like a California native grass that's a no-mow grass. Thinking about within that, what is the sustainability? So like I said, starting with drought tolerance, right? Right plant, right place. You've all heard it a million times, and I'm sorry to repeat it again, but it really does come down to, if you're going to be doing any kind of planting, that's going to be 95% of the issue, the problem at hand is what is the plant that will go in the right space? Then thinking about California as a Mediterranean climate. And I am saying that so broadly because California is huge. And I'm looking at all of the number of participants here and seeing people say where they're from. And I'm just so amazed by the diversity of spaces and areas. And so obviously this is going to be specific to your own climate. But thinking about the fact that California natives, they're naturally adapted to our climate. And specifically the local ecotypes, the ones that are specific to your area, those are really going to be adapted to those. So thinking about that, that's going to make them most likely a little more drought tolerant. Other thoughts, grouping plants with similar water needs kind of goes without saying, and we can talk a little bit more about that. And then utilizing the proper irrigation technology, right? So we're really talking mostly about drip, MP rotators, using things that don't use a lot of water, that don't have that fine mist that can then be absorbed in the air so that you're losing a lot of water. So thinking about different water needs in different plants, right? Plants from coastal areas, they're going to be used to those cooling summer fogs, the moisture soils, right? But the interior natives are used to summer dry. And then you've got your foothill plants that really need that excellent drainage. So this is all going back to what kind of specific space do you have? What are the needs? And can the plant that you like fit within that? Similarly, interior natives, they're going to be more drought tolerant, right? So these are the plants. When I'm thinking about what am I going to plant here in Davis in the Central Valley, I'm going to start thinking about those interior natives, right? That naturally occur in the area where it gets super hot in the summer. Or, maybe start looking at like the rocky slopes. Those are the ones that drain. A lot of them do survive on rainfall alone. I am here to tell you, as a landscape architect, as a designer, you can make things, you can push boundaries, and these plants will survive. And, maybe they can do it with very little irrigation. They can survive on the rain. If you want a beautiful garden, if you want to create gardens that engage people, that bring people in, that make them swoon, you're going to need to use a little bit of water. And I think that there are ways to do that so that you're still doing it sustainably, but keeping in mind that it's not just because someone says it's drought tolerant, it means it doesn't need any water, because that doesn't work. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with WUCLs, which is the water use classification of landscape species, but this is an excellent resource that tells you it has, I don't even know how many different species of California landscape plants, combination of natives and ornamentals, but you can go through and you can find out their water usage. So you can group plants then very easily that are very low water usage. You can find which of the plants that you want to use that are low water, moderate, medium. So you really can start playing around and start creating then a palette of plants and placing those plants within your garden that match and have those similar water uses. And this is just one of those like fantastic tools to be able to do that. The other thing to think about in terms of sustainability is climate adaptability, and really thinking about planning for the long term. And knowing this is like one of the biggest pitfalls, and I fall for it every time, is that when I'm planting a garden, I want it to be amazing right away. And I want to get the biggest plants and I want to fill that space. And I absolutely hate the thought of like those little mulch spaces or the bare earth. And so I overplant it, and then it grows really quickly, and then it's just way too much and it's nuts. And then I get mad at myself every single time, and I fall for it every single time because I'm like, oh my God, there's too much space in between. So really starting to think about the fact and trying to have that foresight to know that that tiny little 4-inch pot of deer grass is actually going to be like 4 feet in a very short amount of time. So thinking about that, designing for maintenance. This is one of those lectures. It's the first lecture that I give my students in any class that I take. And it's thinking about the fact that whatever you plan out there, if you think about architecture, right? Architecture, the moment the building is built, it's the best moment of that building's life. Like that, when it's done, complete, they cut the ribbon, that's the pinnacle of that building. Well, and then it only goes downhill from there. For landscape, we put it in and it keeps getting better and better and better. But we have to design for maintenance, and we have to think about the fact that it doesn't just automatically get better, that you have to put in the time and you have to think about it. So in terms of climate adaptability, one of the things too that I would recommend is really like not taking yourself so seriously and not being afraid to experiment. So try some of these plants that are from slightly hotter climates, right? So for Davis, we're being told that our climate in 50 years, I think, is going to be similar to Barstow's climate. So I'm starting to look at what are the plants that are growing in Barstow and like checking those out and seeing how they're doing in Davis to start thinking about that. And then you all know Calscape. If you're good CNPS people, I just had to give a quick plug because this is where I find out such good information, and I can see the plants that I like. I can find out where those plants are from. A lot of these I just know is like California natives. And then I go to put them in, an area in, I don't know, up in the foothills or up, near Tahoe, let's say. And I find out, oh no, that's really from like Southern California desert. And it's not going to grow so well in Tahoe. Calscape is the place where I find that out, where it's beyond just California native. I can actually start thinking, looking, seeing plant communities, what grows with it. So huge, huge tool for me. And then with the designing for maintenance, really, really, as I said, the drought tolerant natives, they're going to require less water, less mowing, less pruning than turf and high water plants. So it's a really great start. Just using those natives that are drought tolerant is going to be like one of those best starts for maintenance. I am a fan. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it. Like I said, I like seeing the bare space, whether it's mulched or whether it's earth in between the plants. I just want to see it all fluffy and full of plants. And so I do like to add ground covers between plants and kind of use ground covers as a bit of a mulch. And there are other times when I want to use mulch and I go back and forth. But I think putting in ground covers, there's kind of a lot of people that are starting to think about that. Like, just instead of having mulch, thinking about just covering the space with plants that you want, so that the plants that you don't want, the weeds can't necessarily get through. And I will talk, someone had already asked in the question and answer about seeds. And so I am going to talk a little bit about perennial and annual seeds. But this is a great way, I think, to design for maintenance and for filling up those spaces until your plants get to the size you want them. Use annual seeds, fill them up, get the color, make it look all fluffy and wonderful. And then as your plants get bigger and then the annuals start dying, going back, they'll self-seed a little bit. Maybe you don't put as much seed out, then your plants will start to take over and you'll be in great shape. Okay, so designing then for biodiversity. We all know biodiversity is great. And what we want to do ideally is create these migration islands for our insects and our birds and improve the urban habitat. This is the part that I get super excited about, right? Is not just like, how do we preserve open space and how do we save these little, wonderful existing spaces, but how do we take our urban habitat and really our suburban habitat, which no one wants to talk about, it's just suburbia and we kind of dismiss it. But how do we take these spaces that make up so much of our land and improve it? How do we create places that the birds and the bees and the insects and these really cool beneficial insects can play around in? And so, in doing that, we can protect native plants, we can protect some of our endangered plants, and we can create these kind of habitat gardens that serve as refuge for places like for things like ground nesting birds, that may struggle for survival in like ag land, a ground nesting bird that would be in like a grassland, and then all of a sudden it turns into, a plowed field. If you can create some sort of hedgerow or something to protect and improve biodiversity, then like bonus, that's awesome. So in terms of factors that enhance your biodiversity, easy, just like thinking about what you want to do that, the types of plants, the height, like the foliar mass of the leaves, how deep it goes, but also different types of soil composition. I mean, what you're going to hear me say kind of over and over again for, native plants, bring in native insects, you want to have native soil for those native plants to thrive. Like, it's kind of, we're saying, yeah, we're in this tricky urban environment, but let's try and keep things as sort of native as we can, but play around with the surface and the material variation. Like, if you look at any picture that's about biodiversity, there's this crazy log in it. You always see the log that's the perch that like is allowed to biodegrade, that then has the insects eating it, that does all of this stuff. So thinking about the different composition. And then designing in layers, right? It's all about niches. So it's all about having lower to medium to high edges between the different types of vegetation, like between meadow and forest, between wet and dry. Like, if you can do that when you're starting to think about like the plants, then you're going to be in good shape in order to create biodiversity. As I mentioned, your native plants are going to support native insects. And so that's going to increase the resource base for your native insects. And so not only we talk a lot about providing pollen and nectar, but also like the food source for the larval food source for the butterflies, right? Butterflies, super sexy. We all love the butterflies. No one talks about the caterpillars. No one talks about like how important it is that like the eggs are laid on the specific, like the pipevine swallowtail needs the pipevine to be able to lay its eggs for the caterpillars to eat. So really thinking about that when you're kind of going through your plants. And then when you have more insects, you have more birds that come in that eat those insects. And then you've got these really cool beneficial, like the predatory insects that eat all of the pests that we don't want. So that's another reason to add it in. So, more things to think about, diverse habitat, even in the small gardens, right? So the takeaway here is that suburban front plot that you have, even if you're putting in just a couple native plants, like that's going to be awesome. And that's going to make a difference. And the more that individual people start doing that, the better off we're going to be. Like, yes, it's awesome if you can do a whole garden of natives, but even just starting small, that's going to start bringing in those insects. And if everyone starts doing that, well, then it's going to spread out. And then really starting to think about like these areas that don't necessarily have, like where we think about weeds growing. What about the idea of natives? Thinking about the natives along freeways, along parks, green belts, thinking about planting 101 as not just planting 101 in your garden, but planting 101 in areas that you wouldn't necessarily think of. You know, maybe it's some guerrilla seeding, maybe it's starting, you've got little like plants that you can just pop in. I have a class where I made the students do like guerrilla gardening, and they had to go in and they had to create, it was called it was horticultural graffiti, where they had to go in and add plants somewhere. And then obviously thinking about multiple bloom times to do that. Great source. I'm just throwing out my favorite sources here. Xerces Society has some fantastic resources about plants and pollinators, and then the beneficial insects, and really, really good source of information. Again, a lot of you may already know this, but sometimes it's really good to preach to the choir and just make sure that these things are there. So then the other part is this idea of designing for health and well-being, right? We've done our sustainability, we've designed for the insects, but what about for us? What about for the human need to talk about and to feel and be outside in nature? You know, I was talking with someone today, and I guess they just came out with a poll in Sacramento, and 90% of the people polled said that they wanted more open space and they wanted to preserve more open space because it made them feel good. And I was asked to comment on that, and it was kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, of course, right? I teach a class that's called Nature RX, that's all about the healing power of nature, that talks about how important it is. Because I mean, look at this list of these benefits of spending time outside, right? So you're improving cognitive ability, you know, increasing attention span. It's making you happier. It's nature puts you in a better mood. It reduces stress and anxiety. I mean, I tell my students, I'm like, go run around the building and then calm down, like spend some time outside. That's how you're going to feel better. But it's also, there's this whole engagement factor. And so how can we use plants, specifically, how can we use native plants to engage people, not just necessarily with each other, but also with like the stories and the natural stories that are going on between like insects and plants and wildlife, and like all of the really cool stuff that's talking about that, you know, that is happening within nature that makes us feel better. And then, you know, boosting physical health and well-being from spending time outside. Hopefully this is stuff this is all familiar with you. You're all familiar with, you know, and then just nature itself is the best physician, right? Just sitting outside, enjoying that time outside is really key. And then the engagement, right? So this is me looking at an agave, octopus agave, which is like, how amazing is this thing? And I'm sorry, it's not a native plant, but I did want to show engagement. But thinking about engagement, you know, with the plants, where you're just, how cool that these then create these like baby plants that you can plant and this amazing flower, you know? So being able to see that and interact with that, with the wildlife, creating then nooks and crannies where you can watch things or where you can be hidden, but also spaces of engagement where you can be seen, where you can people watch, where you can not just people watch, but insect watch or bird watch or do these things, and create all of these different spaces. And then finally, design and thinking about aesthetics. And I know that when I start talking about California natives, that with a certain crowd, there are people who are like, oh, natives, you're one of them, you know? And so they say, like, there is this like bad name of natives because a lot of them go summer dormant. And so they look dead in the summer. Or people, if I talk about natives, they're like, oh, that's so messy. You're this hippie person and you don't, all you care about is saving the world. And so it's just like this messy native garden. All right, well, the bit of the bad reputation just requires a bit of a stylish makeover. So part of it is helping people to understand, right? This is a natural growth cycle, that buckeye is actually not dead in the summer when it kind of looks it, but that it's going to be like that amazing bright green in just a few months, and it's going to be absolutely beautiful. And that we do have golden hills in California, and talking like, get people to appreciate that golden. I mean, we're starting to see it with like a lot of these naturalistic designers, like the Pete Udoff gardens, where they're leaving seed pods on and they're putting in grasses and doing things like that. So thinking about like challenging the gold overload, right? This idea of like, oh my God, there's too much gold in the summer, like I need something else. Start thinking about different plant selection and placement, you know, so like you've got something like this seasonal burst of milkweed of color, or maybe you've got some aster that comes out, or California fuchsia, like that really bright color that makes things a little more exciting. So it's not just like, oh yeah, California natives, they turn brown in the summer, why do I want them? And then just, you know, basic principles of design, and really thinking about, I think that with the planting, so much of it is about how you lay those plants out, and not just that like this messy idea is really because people do get excited about, oh, I just have these native plants, I'm just going to put them out, like check, I've got my native plant garden, and walk away. And I think that you can create, you could even create, one of the projects that I do with my students is I give them all a different typology, and they have to create a garden using only California native plants within that typology. So one student has to do an architectural modern garden, one has to do a cottage garden, one has to do a Japanese garden, but you can only use California native plants to create these very specific types of typologies. And it's amazing what they come up with. And so really like not getting in this mindset of, okay, California natives, like, you know, we like brown in summer, but instead, no, this is our amazing design palette. So some basic tips, thinking about powerhouse plants, you know, that are going to do really well, thinking about seasonal interests that pop out. Evergreen is really, it's a cool way, the evergreen plants is a cool way to kind of create like a matrix that then people can look around and see. And then really avoiding, like you want some repetition, and you want to avoid that kind of one of everything garden, because it's really hard for someone to look at it without their eyeballs going all over the crazy. And you want that resting sort of something that's solid, that holds it in place. All right, now the nuts and bolts, and really starting to think about the installation. I am ready to plant my native plant. What do I need to do? So I'm going to go through sort of the 4-part of site selection, site and plant, and getting things preparing, actually planting, doing some of the irrigation, and then the mulching. So site preparation and plant selection. We kind of talked a little bit about that, but really, you know, taking those lessons, at least in the terms of plant selection, taking kind of some of those things that I've been talking about, thinking about what that ultimate vision is, how you want it to look, whether you want to bring in insects, whether it's about sustainability, how you can combine all of those together to create that multifunctional landscape. But then what do you need to do? So big question, you know, do I amend my soil? And I really feel like every time I talk to someone, they all have different answers. So this is my take on the massive to amend or not. So unless, and this is specific to native plants, unless the soil is heavily compacted or chemically modified, you know, it's just been fertilized to death, or it's been run over because it's what's left over from the construction of a new building. Unless that's the case, there is really no need to add amendments. Especially with our native plants, so many of them actually thrive in poor soil. And it's really fun to kind of see how some of them will do really well alongside a highway, but will not grow in your garden, you know, and you try and love them and you try and baby them, and it's like, they just want to be ignored. And those are the ones, you know, that will thrive, but you try and do it, forget it. So thinking about the plants that you have and matching them to your existing soil type. So really not putting in a plant that needs excellent drainage in thick clay soil. And that's the hardest thing. Like, it even hurts my heart to say that, because there's so many plants that I want. And I read that says perfect drainage, and I'm like, oh my God, I can think about it. I can figure out a way to do this. And there are ways. You can create mounds, you can put them in raised beds, you can put them in planters. So there are ways to do it. But if you're really just going to put it, use the soil, put them in your garden, you want to match those plants. If you're going to be, whoops, sorry, go back. If you're going to be amending, now I can't figure out how to go back. Uh-oh. No. Okay, I can. Thank you. There we go. If you're going to be amending, then using organic matter to add nutrient, to add beneficial microorganisms, that's the way to go, right? Organic compost, you can top dress on top, you can mix it in with the soil, but it really, like, unless you're going to be doing your whole doing all of the soil in your garden, and you're going to mix it all up to 18 inches or 2 feet or whatever it is, it just doesn't make sense to do amendment. Like, adding a little bit of organic matter can help for the nutrients, for the microorganisms, but otherwise work with what you've got. Knowing, as I said, native soils prefer native plants prefer native soils, and that the native soils that you have, those are the ones that are going to promote that microbial activity. You come in with some fancy planting mix to add to your soil to loosen it up or lighten it up, that's not going to help. That's actually, you're not going to get the cool microorganisms and the mycorrhizals, like piece fungi that you want. There's not going to be any kind of crazy symbiosis, because it's going to be this potting soil that just doesn't, maybe it's a little more lightweight, but it's not going to create what it is that you want. So to improve drainage, right? We've got that clay soil. I know here in Davis, that's an issue. Gypsum can help with very clay soils. Another option is what I was saying about planting on mounds. So you can actually, you can build up a mound of soil. You can plant within that so that then it drains very well. The key then is that you just don't have these weird little mounds all over your landscape, that it actually looks like it's natural sort of undulations, as opposed to like, I created this mound to create drainage, right? So if you can work with that and create something that looks natural, then you're in good shape. When you are planting in clay, pre-moistening the soil so that it's workable, so that it's not like complete hard pan, or overwatering it so that it's mud, that's going to be ideal. So like watering it or like irrigating the night before, that you're going to be planting. And also knowing how late you can plant. I've pushed the boundaries before, and I've planted when it's just been like mud and rain and miserable, and it doesn't work. I'm like, this time it'll be fine. Like I can just get it in, even though it rained for 3 days and it's going to rain for another 2 days. I'm like, it'll be fine. And it just, planting in mud when the soil's all broken up, and it's not going to be good. You're destroying the soil structure, and your plant's not going to be happy. And then the other thing is to keep in mind is keep standing water away from the crowns of natives in summer and winter, right? So like right there at the crown, that's where rot happens. That's where all of these things that you really want to avoid. So like this area right up here, keep the water away, have some sort of drainage so that it goes away from there. In terms of actually choosing the plants, this idea of a balanced root and shoot ratio, so that it may not be the prettiest, like biggest, most lush plant in the nursery, but you can tell that there's some good root growth and that the plant itself matches it, right? If you can inspect the root system, that's going to be key, and really look at those root bound plants and see, or alternatively, if maybe it was like a plug that's recently been up potted into a gallon or a 2-gallon pot, and it hasn't rooted yet, so that you just have this little thing and then all of this soil, or the alternative. So look and see how those roots are doing. You want to see white roots, you want to see growth. The plants that look too good to be true, super lush, they may be over fertilized. And that's kind of like your steroid situation, right? Where they do really well and amazing at first, and then they're just kind of like once you bring them home. And then remembering that the crown of the plant should be at or just above the soil level. And that if it's below the soil level and the soil's up against it, that is going to cause all sorts of like rot, and that's where the bacteria can enter, and then you're going to be in big trouble. So installation with the planting, what are the things that you need to do? So this is, again, nuts and bolts. You will hear over and over again, dig the hole twice as wide as the pot, as the size of the root ball. And it is really, really good advice. It's also really hard to do, but if you can do it, do it. Like I end up making it, I feel like as with even my best intentions, it's never as wide as it should be. If you can make it twice as wide, that's going to be such a bonus. The other thing is that you want it the same depth as the pot. You don't want it significantly deeper than the pot because you want the bottom of the root ball to rest on solid compacted earth. If it's too low and you have to then add more soil to raise the plant up, then what can happen is that soil can wash away and then your plant's going to fall down. So you really want to get that perfect depth that's just the size of the pot and just as wide. The other thing you want to avoid is that perfectly round and smooth hole. Because if it's really smooth on the edges, the roots can't penetrate. So you want to go through, and if it's like tough clay and you're having a hard time getting in, going in with a shovel or with something or a rake and scarifying and just like creating little like scratches all along the edges, that's going to be really key because the roots are going to be able to break in more easily than if it's like this perfectly sloped, like smooth thing. When it's time to take the pot out, I will say that you can be a lot rougher with plants than you think you can be. People are so cautious and they can take a lot. I mean, I'm not saying like yank and go, but you can kind of squeeze around the pot, start, you're going to have one hand kind of at the base and then the other hand, and you're going to slowly pull it out and support the pot as it goes. But then it's going to be really important to break up those root bound plants. And that is where people can be really timid and you just don't want that. If it is root bound, the last thing you want is to take this like perfectly root bound, perfect like cylinder and stick it in and then cover it up with dirt because those roots aren't going to go anywhere. They have absolutely no incentive to do anything other than just stay in place. So you need to tear them apart. You need to even go in with a shovel or something to break it up when it gets really tough. So break them up and don't be afraid to do it. And then you're going to place the plant in your prepared hole. So this is why the circling roots, root bound plants, like it's really bad, especially trees and shrubs, right? So the root bound plants, I already said, break them up, tease them apart before you plant them. Then most of them are good. But the trees and the shrubs that have those kinked roots or the circling roots, you want to return those. This is a huge issue in a lot of nurseries, especially with sort of the tree stock that you can buy from nurseries. I mean, here on campus, we see it all the time to the extent that we're talking about, like, should we try and start our own tree nursery? Because it's really hard. The plants either sit for too long or they sit for too long. And so those roots, and they're in a small space. And so they start circling. And when you get a circling root, it's just, you can put the tree in and it'll look good for a little while, but it's never going to go because it's circling. It's never going to really like attach its roots into the soil. And so it may grow up really quickly, but then at that first wind or storm, boom, it's just going to come down. And so you just don't want to take those. Those are the ones that you don't choose from the nursery. And those are the ones that like you send back if they come. So here are some examples where you can really see how those roots, and it's strangling the tree. So it's completely strangling it and just making it so that it can't survive. So when you do then go in and place the plant, this is really like, if there's one sort of technical detail that you take away from this, the top of the plant soil needs to be even with the surrounding soil. You don't want it above. I see this all the time where it's up above and then there's this little inch of pot, of roots that show up above that are then exposed and dry out and it's terrible. Or you see it way below and then the soil covered up and then covering the ground. And then that's where you get like root rot, you get rot, and you get all of these like terrible things coming in, and your plant doesn't do well. So one thing to remember, it just needs to be like just right. So this idea of laying a stake or a shovel or something right alongside the plant in the hole to make sure that they are even, that makes a ton of sense. And if they're not, then you need to adjust it. And if it's too low and you do need to add soil below, you want to really compact it down so that it, before you put the plant back on top of it, because if you don't, it'll do what I was talking about earlier, where it'll just wash away and then it'll fall down on its own. So even, that's the most important thing. Okay, then around the plant, you want to backfill with the native soil, right? This is not where you want to create this like little area and you're just backfilling with like some, even if it's like the most beautiful, fluffy, wonderful, loamy soil, that doesn't make sense. The plant isn't going to know what to do with it. Or it just is going to stay in that little bit and it's going to be happy in that little bit, but then it has no incentive, those roots, to go into the native soil. So really, you want to plant back with the native soil, the soil that you pulled out, you want to put back. And as you're putting it back, you're firming it in stages because you don't want the air gaps. And you want to then water it in so that and push it down again to get rid of any of those areas. And so the last thing you do when you put it in is that you kind of hug it. My friend Stacy talks about just hugging it, giving it this final little hug to just pat it in with your hands. And then you can also create a watering ring. So key part about planting, and again, you'll talk about this probably in the irrigation or the watering webinar, but plants do need extra water when they're established. And so you want to make sure that they get that extra water. And one great way to do that is by creating a watering ring around it. And that's just basically putting a berm around that area. So I said, give it a hug, put the watering ring, you create like a little berm around it so that there's a space for the water to go around. It's like a low wall of soil around the plant. And then the other thing you want to do is that if you see damaged, weak branches, anything in the plant or any inward growing, crossing stems, this is a great time to do it. Just cut them back, give the plant like a great start to its new life in the space that you've chosen for it. So here, just quick sort of showing, see how the root ball is level with the grade, the planting hole is twice the width, there's your existing grade. And then you're backfilling and you're firming it like gently as you go through. And then just briefly to show what you need to do if you are planting on a slope, which is something that happens more often than you think. And so essentially what you're doing is you're cutting a flat area into the triangle and then a flat back so that you've created kind of a platform for your plant. And you're going to take that soil and then that goes to the lower part, and that's going to be the berm below that's going to hold the plant in place, that's going to hold water too, so that the water doesn't just slide on down past the plant and not give it any. But then, because this is straight up and down, that's not like ideal for the plant. So you're going to cut that back so that you've got more space for this water to now really soak in. It's more of a kind of basin there. You're going to take that water and add it to the berm. And then the berm, I've been obsessed with this idea of making the berm look like a croissant, right? So right below the plant, at the steepest side, that's where it's thickest. And then it kind of tapers as you go up the hillside a little bit. And that's going to hold the water in place. And so I did mention that I wanted to talk about seed. And I don't want people to think about, to say, oh, just talking about native, perennials and potted perennials. Seeds are amazing. And this is something that is still relatively new to me. And we're in California. We have amazing annual flowers that are just all up and down in different areas of California. So do not forget about the amazing show that is mostly put on during spring in California with our local ecotype seeds. So what's cool about it is that they're inexpensive and they're accessible. They're super easy to plant. And so, literally most of the seeds that I use are ones that are wind scattered. And so you're really just sort of broadcasting them. And I really am kind of obsessed with this idea now of filling in urban cracks and crevices and taking the seed and just starting to think about like, where can these native plants go and where do they do well? And you're bringing in pollinators and you're rewilding areas that normally just have weeds or abandoned. And so like, this is just super simple way. And even just thinking about how you can engage children and people like with science and what are the different plants that come up? What are the insects that come to these plants? How are they using them as pollinators, right? Really just easy sort of entree into science and nature. Okay, which is all like a plug for a research project that I'm actually working on and collaborating with Miraday Living Labs, which is a nonprofit in the Sacramento area. And so what we're doing this year, it's our first sort of seed pile project. And we are giving away, for this first year, we're sticking pretty local. So it's going to be like the Yolo, Sacramento, and Solano County area. We're really hoping to expand to all of California for next year. But we're really cognizant of the need to use seeds from local ecotypes. And so right now we have access to the seeds that we know in our sort of tri-county area. And so those are the seeds that we have accessible, and we don't want to send our seeds down to Southern California and that sort of thing. But essentially what we're doing is people can sign up at Miraday Living Labs at the Seed Pile project. And if you sign up, we will send you, or you can pick up a packet of native seeds, and they're all wildflower seeds. And the idea is which of these local seeds do well in human altered places, so cities, roadsides, the alleyways, the cracks, the crevices. And so we're asking people to take their seed packet, to dump it out into a little pile, and then monitor it and see, what does well, what doesn't do well. And so monthly, just photos and pictures and kind of descriptions of what's going on, so that we ultimately can come up with what are some of these seeds that like we could give to Caltrans so that they could just disperse them alongside the highway, or that could go along like different corridors or in alleyways or under power lines, that bring in natives and create this biodiversity in areas where that are very urban or suburban, where you don't necessarily see them, and that you don't have to create all of this maintenance and all of this, planning and cost, and it's a low maintenance, and then you can get people engaged and watching and learning that sort of stuff. So I'm really excited about this project, and I think it's going to be fun. So I just want to show a few pictures. This is the space that I showed as the multifunctional landscape. This is here in Davis in the courtyard at the Landscape Architecture Building. And we are just broadcasting seeds every year and just getting these amazing spring flower shows that students absolutely love. That, we love to be able to come out to the courtyard and see them. And it's just like this intense color. And then the other place I've been doing a lot of using of seeds is green roofs. And really seeing looking at grassland habitat, looking at like local ecotype annual seeds, some perennial seeds, and seeing, so like this is Bolander sunflower. We've got, I think this is owls, something clover and poppies, and just seeing like in a green roof that we have what does well and what can we do that's, again, doesn't take someone spending a lot of time planting individual plants and plugs, so that we can still get this spectacular show. And then kind of thinking about the irrigation and how important it is that you've put in the effort, you've figured out what plants you want, you planted them correctly, they're all level. You can't just walk away. You got to have some backup. You've got to have first irrigation for establishment. And so that's going to be a 1 to 2 year project, making sure the plants go. And even then, you just need to have irrigation for backup. Even though those plants are established, we do have periods of drought and things are getting hotter. So keeping an eye and having that irrigation for backup, for cooling things down, there are just lots of reasons, and for making things look pretty. I mean, the irrigation really helps these plants look really, really pretty. So, right, it is going to help ensure the health and the long-term survival of the vegetation. It's going to mean that you don't have to replace those plants. The plants are very, they can be, especially if you're using like, potted perennials, they can be expensive. Irrigation does help cool the surrounding area and the air around it, and a measure of fire protection. You do see when there's fire, people start to turn on their irrigation. And if you can have like more wet soil, that's going to be more of a deterrent for fire spreading. So in terms of irrigation, what you want to do is monitor the amount of water that you put on, make sure that you carefully monitor it. You don't want to water too frequently for the selected species, which is so hard for me because, again, I want to overlove my plants so much and I want to make sure that they've got water all the time. And that's a huge no with so many of these natives, right? I mean, like, Ceanothus is killing me because I just want to give it water in the summer and it's like, stay away, don't touch me. Like, I'll be better if you go away. And I'm like, please let me give you some water. And so just really understand how much water the plant wants, read up about it and then follow that. But in general, like a deep irrigation, and that's key. So it's better to do more deep water in like longer frequencies than to do several short irrigations. And then same thing, you think about houseplants. This is what they always tell you: let the plants dry out between irrigation events. No plant wants those wet roots or, just sitting in water, unless it's like, a bog plant. So ideally you're irrigating enough to thoroughly get the salts out of the root zone so that, like, again, like larger irrigation events. The drip, the mini speakers, I already mentioned how that's better than the impact heads. Part of which is that the impact heads can facilitate stem disease, right? So if you've got the water constantly on the stem and up high, then that could make the plant sort of soggy and then disease can break in. Whereas like that at the lower, sort of at the root level, that's going to be more effective for the plants and less likely to hurt them. And then I am a newfound fan of the grid system with inline drip. In that, let's say this has inline and they're every 18 inches apart, and then it's gridded so that these are 18 inches apart, so that you really do end up having full coverage across the space, and your plants can go and fit within there and like be somewhat close to where that drip is. But even if they're not right on one of those emitters, they will still, like, that area is fully covered. And then mulch. These are some of my students, very excited to be hanging out in the mulch. And honestly, with mulch, the key is matching the environmental conditions to the plant needs, right? So what plants do you have? If you're doing a lot of annual seeds, it's going to be hard to cover it with like a 2-inch thick layer of mulch because they're not going to be able to get through. So, but if you're doing some larger, like beautiful, I don't know, specimen 2-gallon plants that you're putting between each other, and it's more of a garden setting, then that's a little more formal, mulch is going to be your best friend. So you really think about how you want to use the mulch. In general, it's going to conserve moisture. It's going to reduce the temperature of the plant roots. But you also want to think about what is coming through. Do you want to use ground cover instead? Do you want to use these, ephemeral annuals coming up? And the key takeaway with mulch is keeping the mulch away from the trunk or the crown of the plant. I have gone through so many installations where I've placed the plants, and then I've come back and that mulch is literally mounded up, 6 inches on the trunk of whatever it is. And that's again where bacteria comes in. It's going to cause mold. It's going to cause rot. Push the mulch away. Keep an area that's free of mulch from around the plant, and it's going to solve so many problems and keep those plants so much healthier. And then finally, just ending on this importance for maintenance. And this was a picture that I took when I was in China, and I just loved their green uniforms so much, and the pink hats. And I don't know about this amazing hard hat, but I would happily be on a maintenance crew if I could wear that outfit. So I figured we needed to show that front and center. This is what happens without maintenance. This is actually another green roof, one in Sacramento, where it really kind of was this idea of photographed and forgotten. It got awards, it was LEED Platinum, and they had no maintenance plan, and they had no money for ongoing maintenance or to change things to like use a better soil or to follow up. And so this is what happens. So really, you have to think ahead. You have to plan for the long term, knowing that plants will grow, not just putting in something massive right next to the path because it looks good now, but then not thinking about the fact that like you're going to have to hack it back. I can't even tell you how many things I see that go by that like, you know, they've just cut them because they're going into a path. So really, any design that you have, think about, whoops, that maintenance plan, and like including a maintenance plan and then planning for maintenance costs and knowing those costs up front. And then just kind of to wind things down, another plug, but thinking outside of the box and like, what are some cool ways to do maintenance? And so I've lately been obsessed with this idea of sheep as lawnmowers and integrating sheep into like lawns. If we have to have lawns, we've got them in lots here in Davis. And so I actually did recently launch the UC Davis sheep mowers. And it's been actually this amazing project where there are sheep and they are cutting the lawn, and we're comparing sort of how effective Grounds and Landscape Services is doing half of the lawn regularly with lawn mowers compared to the sheep just kind of munching away on the grass. We do it, they come out like once a month for about 3 days in a row. And what's cool about this is that is creating these kind of multifunctional landscapes that I was talking about, where we're reducing maintenance, we're creating biodiversity in that the sheep are ideally like some of the weeds, bindweed, they love. So they're taking out some of these weeds and they're letting some of the other plants come in, is what we're hoping. It's a sustainable option. We're not using as much gas for the lawn mowers. It's just bringing sheep out. They're fertilizing the lawn naturally. And then the engagement and the health and well-being, we've brought out umbrellas and chairs, and we're trying to bring people out so that they can come and watch the sheep and just like reduce their stress and anxiety. And then finally, that creates this wonderful sort of aesthetic, that like beautiful pastoral thing that creates a space that people are really happy to be in. So that is kind of my spiel. And if you have any questions, I know I went right until 6:30, so there may not be any questions, but I had fun and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Haven. Yeah, we don't quite have time for questions, but we've been answering as we go along. And you have and for people tuning in, you can save the chat with all the answers by clicking on the 3 dots towards the bottom of the chat window. And this is being recorded and we'll put it on our YouTube channel for folks to use as a resource. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great.
Yeah, this was really fun.
Thank you for speaking, Haven. That was very cool. Sheep mowers are gotta be the best thing out there. And
We
for
need
everyone
more.
else, yes, this has been recorded. It will be sent around with a list of resources. It'll be emailed out to you in a few days, and then it will be available on CNPS's YouTube page. We know we didn't get to everyone, but we hope to see you all next month, first Thursday, 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. again on watering. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.